Joey, how's my hair? Great. All right, we're live. Welcome to the Freemium Podcast. For all the 50,000 listeners we got here today, I'm kidding. We're not actually doing a live thing. You can vape if you want. We got a very interesting guest today, Michael Khoury, and there's a bunch of you out there that know Michael and I back in the day on Facebook used to have these, I guess you could call them political debates about our points of view on different topics or different issues. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget this. Corey Wawalski, a buddy of ours from high school, he even wrote in the comment section, because we were going back and forth. I forget what it was. And he said, you guys, each of you make such great points. He goes, I find myself going back and forth on which point or which ideology I actually agree with. So it's a pleasure to have you on here today. And
pleasure to be here.
Mike's been asking me for a while. I've been asking him too. And you are a lawyer by trade. Mm-hmm. And before we get into the other stuff, I want to talk about that because I do have a bunch of questions about your job. Tell us about your job as a lawyer.
So I'm a criminal lawyer for legal aid. In Canada, what that signifies is essentially a public defender. That's how people would know it from movies and TV shows. So I defend people for crimes, people that can't afford to hire their own lawyers. It's based on certain salary requirements, depending on whether you're a single person, married with children, etc. You make a certain amount of money and you qualify. So generally, it's people on welfare, the large majority, and students that work part-time, and anybody that works relatively around the minimum wage will qualify. So for a single person, for example, it's the maximum you can make is around $32,000 to qualify for legal aid. And even then,
so
you'll have a
32 and under.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's what I do for a living, defending those people when they're accused of crimes.
What are most of the crimes that people are accused of, or is it all over the place?
I mean, it's all over the place. Personally, I'm in my, fifth year now or sixth year. I'm handling the lesser ones that I guess you could say. So
less intense.
Yeah. So DUIs, thefts, breaches of conditions, conjugal violence, everything from assault to assault causing bodily harm, harassment, like basically anything that doesn't result in serious consequences. So the thefts and the frauds under 5,000, anything larger right now goes to the other courthouse. Since I'm at the municipal court, it goes to the provincial court, and then those crimes get dealt with by some of my colleagues that are a little bit more senior.
Has this job given you a different perspective on life? Because just like you and I, we both grew up quite well-to-do. We went to private high school. Yeah. You grew up in a nice neighborhood. I grew up in a nice neighborhood. And so the types of people that you're dealing with are, in terms of salary and let's call it the neighborhoods they're going to live in, it's not as high as like where we grew up. Has this job given you a different perspective on life? Because I always come up to you and the question I always ask you, like, when are you going to go to the private sector?
Yeah.
And like, why has it given you a different perspective, and why do you continue to do this? Because you can go and probably make double, triple, quadruple the salary you're making right now.
I mean, there's a slight caveat to that. In criminal law, the opportunities for making those massive salaries aren't necessarily there unless you're representing companies like accused of tax fraud and stuff like that.
White collar stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, could I make more in private practice? Potentially. The economic advantages of working for legal aid is that government salary and government pension. But I can safely say that even if you told me that I would make double, I wouldn't want to get out of legal aid. Essentially because of the freedom it gives me to do the cases that I want to do and to represent the people I want to represent. So I'm free to take on the cases that satisfy the criteria for legal aid, meaning that if they're not sufficiently severe, that they present some kind of defense. So generally, my files are going to be more interesting than the average, and it gives me the opportunity to work with that clientele. So when you're talking about different perspective on life, there's no doubt. When you come from a privileged background, your perspective on what's possible and how people live is extremely skewed because I think it's like a natural way for human beings to interpret the world around them is that your range of what you see starts from what you have and goes up. So you generally don't tend to think about what's on the other side of that range. You're focused on what you have and how you can get more and who has more and what that looks like. So you the people in the other category kind of fall by the wayside. So you don't necessarily, your mind doesn't turn to them on a daily basis. And I think that's the perspective, or that's the aspect about it that has gotten me to just have a different outlook, just look at things through a different lens. When I know how some people live, it allows you to appreciate what you have, and two, it allows you to appreciate what people don't have. So that's my goal going into law, my goal going into criminal law especially, for me, it was always really entertaining to work for the underdog. I love that position. I love starting from there because it's so satisfying.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, totally. It was a shocker. So satisfying to emerge from that. I don't want to say victorious because that's definitely not always the case, but to start from that position. So with all that said, the satisfaction that you get from helping somebody that's less fortunate and that finds themselves in a really, really difficult situation most of the time, and I know the prevailing stereotype is going to be that, criminals get themselves into this position, but in a majority of the time, these are conditions, they're conditions created that put someone in a position where they commit a crime. And
can you offer an example of that?
So the classic example is the alcoholic, the drug addict, or the alcoholic that steals from the SAQ.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Obviously they're on welfare. They make $600 a month. I think we all know what rents are in the city now.
Yeah.
Doesn't leave them with much disposable income to satisfy both their mental and physical habit of drinking. Obviously, the consequences, if you're an alcoholic and you drink constantly, the consequences of stopping cold turkey are extremely severe to the point where it can cause death. So, that's a classic example. That might be a cherry-picked example, but there's so many things people have gone through in their youth. Again, our indigenous population in Montreal, everything that they've gone through, and that hereditary
predisposition to.
Predisposition, I wouldn't say, but it's more like the constant pressure that's been put on them from when European settlers arrived till now has created a situation that is conducive to them not succeeding. And if we knew what they experienced and if we understood how they experienced it, it would come as no surprise that they make up 16% of our jail population through, personally, I would argue, no fault of their own. So,
but where does, like, you're bringing up a lot of valid points, and I'll play devil's advocate.
Please.
And this is how, my point of view. And I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very complicated picture. But my question is, where does accountability come into this? Because I agree. People, for example, people that come from the ghetto in the U.S. or people from around here, the indigenous population, I fully agree. The deck of cards that they're dealt is not as good of a deck as we are dealt. That is 100%. I'm not going to argue with you there. But where does accountability come into this scenario when, there are people who make it out of the ghetto. There are people that stop being a drug addict or who stop being an alcoholic. It's a lot more difficult for them compared to other people, for sure. But if we all just kind of sit there and go, oh, well, this is the deck of cards I'm dealt with. It's really shit. I'm just going to be a loser for the rest of my life, a loser alcoholic. I'm not going to amount to anything. Mm-hmm. Like, if we have that attitude, that's not good for them either. So, I'll just go back to the question. Where does accountability come into the picture here?
Well, there's always accountability. So when one of my clients, who's an alcoholic, who's a drug addict, who's, suffered abuse at the hands of his parents, who God knows the many number of things that they could have possibly gone through, and then they commit a crime, they're still being held accountable. Nobody's advocating for exempting these individuals from punishment. What we're advocating is that punishment is not going to do anything about it. If you don't address the core issues that have created the societal conditions that made these people commit a crime in the first place, you're not going to fix anything. And I'll give you the perfect example. And this example is in line with, who is making the decisions. So when laws are created, they are created by, in our country, Parliament, in the States, Congress, and the Senate. And those are generally people that have grown up in exceptional conditions, that have every opportunity to succeed, and that have succeeded. It would have actually been unlikely that they don't succeed based on all the privilege they've had.
Unless they became like an alcoholic or drug addict, pretty much.
Yeah. But they had no reason to. That wasn't created in their youth. They didn't experience anything that would make them need to turn to those substances to cope with everyday life. Yeah. These people are making laws, and they're making laws and saying that, well, we should punish people when they commit crimes because that would stop me from committing a crime. There's no argument that when you have something to lose, committing a crime doesn't seem very attractive because you have something to lose. Mm-hmm. And so it's entirely legitimate for people in positions of authority who are, a certain socioeconomic bracket, or in a certain socioeconomic bracket, to believe that what we call deterrence is something to strive for in the prevention of crime. The problem is that those are not the people that your laws are addressing. It is not the well-off that are committing crimes every day. They are not the people that you need to deter from doing so. So accountability is great, and it's one of the elements that's necessary in a punishment to accomplish the ultimate goal, which is to lower crime. So yes, being accountable is great. The problem is that hypothetically, you don't drive your car drunk, because if you do, that you're going to lose your driver's license. Get a lot of trouble, you're not going to be able to come to work. You're going to get a fine that you're going to have to pay.
If I had a big DUI, I can lose my company.
There you go. So if you have nothing to lose, there's nothing stopping you from committing crime. So what that tells me is that, yes, accountability is all well and good, but if you don't address the issues that have made it so that these people have nothing to lose, then you're never going to address the root, the thing that you're setting out to address, with this accountability, and that being to stop crime. So a sort of criminal legal question morphs into an economic one, a socioeconomic one, and it compels you to address that problem, the problem that created those circumstances in the first place, if you want to address your criminal problem.
And so okay, so I'll push back again. I'm going to be pushing
please.
back this whole entire podcast.
Yeah,
Okay, so let's take an example. If we look at a place that is trying to address the root cause, and that's open to debate as well. What is the root cause of all this? From my understanding and from the research that I've looked at, most of the time it's drug addiction, alcohol addiction, opioids, all that kind of stuff that causes people to do this. You know more about it than I do, but I'll just make my main point.
Yeah.
If we look at a place like, perfect example, and the city's crumbling right now, San Francisco. San Francisco is a place that took the approach of soft on crime. They decriminalized a lot of things, and you see videos. I know it's sensationalized by the media, but you see this on social media as well. And this is not me watching Fox. There is San Francisco. It's a war zone. A lot of businesses have left. The homelessness is out of control. And if there's no consequences to walking into a store, stealing merchandise under $1,000, people are going to keep doing it. So, and they have all these programs. They have all this homelessness. They're trying to build affordable housing for the homeless people, which again is super corrupt because there's just kickbacks going on all over the place to the politicians. So it's like, what from the gist that I'm getting from what you just said is we have to address the issue before they commit the crime. And there's definitely some truth to that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong if that's not what you mean. But that's essentially like we need to have social services in place so that these people don't commit the crimes in the first place. Mm-hmm. I agree. But to what point? Wow. And so for like there was a clip the other day of Pierre Poilievre, and the journalist asked him the exact same question.
Real scholar, yeah.
But he asked him the question. He asked the question to him. So that's the guy.
I know you're going downhill when you're quoting Pierre Poilievre.
Well, he's probably going to be our next prime minister. So, yeah, but the question was, so there was a gentleman, and he had committed something crazy. It was like 150 crimes in a year. It was insane. So they kept, and you're right. So he kept committing the crimes, wherever the hell it was. They put him in jail, and he'd be out by the end of the night because it's like this guy doesn't have anything. Keeping him in jail isn't going to solve the problem. So CBC, I think it was CBC or whatever, the journalist asked him the question, well, isn't this a reflection of social services? There's not enough social services in place. And Pierre Poilievre looked at him and he basically went, like, are you serious? Like, this is a guy that needs to be in jail. No matter what amount of social services or no matter what amount of programs that we throw at this guy, he's too far gone. He belongs in jail. And that's just the main point. Like, I guess my question is, we need to have, like, where would you put the line of the balance between law and order and then social services to actually prevent this from happening in the first place? I guess that's my question.
So we'll start off by addressing this San Francisco example. So this is a huge right-wing media talking point. As a matter of fact, I have spoken to two people completely independently before this conversation.
Yeah.
Who have both brought up this example, this exact example.
Yeah.
And that tells me, the first thing that tells me is to be on guard, because these talking points come back very often when trying to advocate for a certain position. So,
sorry to cut you off there. Joey, could you just do me one quick favor? Can you just type in, let us know the crime rate of San Francisco over the past 5 years, if it's increased or decreased? If it's marginally increased, I'll agree with you there. From what I was seeing, and you're right, the media that I get exposed to is more on the right than on the left. So I'm having an open mind to this. Mm-hmm. But from my understanding, the crime rate has increased significantly. And you know what? Maybe we'll see what the data says. But continue. Sorry.
I actually have it right here.
Yeah.
It's declined in the last 5 years.
Oh, okay. So the crime rate in San Francisco has declined.
Okay. So
okay, and homelessness. Would you agree with, at least give me this, homelessness has increased significantly there?
Most likely, yeah.
Okay, so continue. Sorry, go
what
ahead.
I would just caveat is that,
Okay.
and I know you know this, is that homelessness is not a crime. But
No, but
and what's extremely interesting about what just happened here, and I think, and I don't want to, I'm not throwing this in your face in any measure of
You
the
can
word.
throw it.
I don't want to.
You'll eventually throw
because
something in my face,
Because
so
you
don't
are
worry.
open-minded, and
Yeah.
it's the people that aren't open-minded that I really derive pleasure from doing this. What just happened here is an extremely interesting example of these talking points and how they are based on pure speculation. I had no idea what the crime rates in San Francisco were. And as a matter of fact, when you asked him to look it up, I actually thought they were going to be going up.
Yeah.
And I was preparing arguments for that point, which,
As lawyers do.
yeah, but it's
Was that stat from CNN, Joey?
No.
It's a joke.
Okay. There's like a dip and then like a bit increase, but in the last 5 years it's.
Yeah, so the crime rate in San Francisco has
Yeah.
in fact declined
so
over the
what
past 5 years.
what I would say is that that's actually surprising, because
Yeah.
my theory is that the more you remove social services, the more you leave people to fend for themselves, the more crime you're going to have. The more unequal a society, the more crime you're going to have. So that stat would tend to not support my position, because I think, as a general rule, while maybe not necessarily in California, as a general rule, we are shifting, ever since the beginning of the pandemic, more and more to this right-wing ideology, this libertarian individualistic ideology that we take care of ourselves and not anybody else. And so that would tell me that it should be going up. Now, the point that I was going to make about San Francisco is that you can't decriminalize things immediately and then expect, without addressing the other issue, expect crime rate to go down. Crime rate's not going to go down just by simply not punishing people. It's going to go down by establishing a social safety net, and then part of that process will be to decriminalize, but not decriminalize by removing responsibility, but decriminalize by pushing these people towards something else other than the criminal justice system that cannot produce the results that we want it to produce. We want the criminal justice system to solve all our social ills, but that's not its function. The function of our criminal justice system is to protect society from crime. It cannot cure the problems with society that cause crime in the first place. Mm-hmm. So the criminal justice system is perfectly set up to deal with these offenders, like, I don't want to say the guy you were talking about with 150 crimes, because when Pierre Poilievre talks, I wouldn't take his hello, how are you for granted. But individuals that are violent, individuals that are a danger to society, the criminal justice system works well. These people are separated from society because they need to be. I'm not saying that their initial violence was not caused by something that was exterior to themselves, because it probably was. If you look at all major serial killers, their childhoods were let's say, not the greatest.
They're usually pretty dark childhoods.
Yeah, exactly. So these, and it goes back to like what I say about every individual. Nobody is born a criminal. You're made that way. I don't think anybody would argue that. I don't think anybody would argue that when a baby comes out of the womb that he's automatically evil. So if you start from that premise, then what is allowing these people to be made into criminals? It's clearly our society. It's our values. It's what we hold dear. that materialism, that the aspects of capitalism that leave people behind, and it creates these things. Yeah,
You want one?
I can tell you don't like that one.
No,
I'm good.
Yeah.
So you have to have, if children are made to be criminals, you have to protect them. You have to protect their parents. You have to make it so that these people grow up in conditions that are conducive to success.
And how do we do that?
You don't. Well, okay. So to do that requires money, obviously. To set up a social safety net.
Because it's like where you're going. Like again, sorry to cut you off here. Like
No.
I agree. Again, you're making good points, but I feel like it's kind of I feel like you're leading us towards like this utopia of where everyone gets along, everyone sings kumbaya, it's fantastic, we all live together, and there's no crime, everyone makes the same amount of money, no one fights with each other, no one's power hungry, and that's what we're striving to. And, in a perfect world, I mean, everyone wishes that we lived in this utopia, but
So why
it's
not
just
strive for it? Why accept?
because that's what gets
why
us.
accept it and say that it's human nature?
History has shown that governments that try to strive to this utopia, that it typically speaking does not end very well.
What has history shown about governments who don't?
They've in my opinion, they've created the best system known to man, which is capitalism.
Can you give
When
me
capitalism,
an example of a
capitalism
successful
has
society?
We're about to clip this shit. We're about to get going. This Zin is not. Hold on. I am a capitalist, and I'm an unapologetic capitalist. Of course I am. I run a business. But capitalism today has lifted millions, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It helped lift millions of people out in China. It helped lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in India. It's helped in places like Rwanda. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, capitalism has when the incentives are aligned. It's like Charlie Munger says. I've said this quote before. Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. When the state is in charge, or when the state dictates how much you're allowed to produce, what you're allowed to produce, what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to think, incentives are not aligned. So when you go to a place like China, I don't remember the leader's name. I think it was Mao Zedong was the bad guy. And then in the 1970s, someone else came in and he started implementing, you're allowed to have private property. You're allowed to do whatever you want to do. You're allowed to, as opposed to having Mao Zedong, with the farmers, he actually ended up doing this. He thought it was a brilliant idea to get all the farmers to basically start producing steel. What ended up happening, there was a mass famine, 30 million people died. The same thing happened in Russia. The same things happen in these places. And so when the incentives are aligned, if I can make more money and I can support my family better by selling more grain, example, I'm incentivized to do it. I don't want the government over me telling me what I am and what I'm not allowed to produce in terms of a product or a service. And I know there are sometimes debates for people saying that like capitalism hasn't lifted all these people out of poverty. So my question to you is, and I know that's most likely your viewpoint. So what has lifted the world out of poverty over the last 3 decades? There's the poverty rate in the world is the lowest it's ever been. That's a fact. And this is not coming from a right-wing think tank. Joey, you can fact check that, please. Just say the poverty rate today. You'll get it from the UN. It's lower than ever. Okay. And my opinion why it's lower than ever is because of capitalistic principles, not full capitalism. And there are different
principles?
Free market economy. You're in charge of your own destiny.
Okay.
It's not the government dictating what I can and can't do in terms of working.
But the government does dictate.
No, they don't. I can start a business if I want here in Canada.
Yeah, of course.
That's what I mean by that. They're not going to be like, you're a farmer. You're only allowed to produce this. You have to ration this, and you have to make this. If I'm allowed to go, if there's a supply and demand, if I see an opportunity, if there's a demand in some industry, I go, there's a pretty high demand there. The supply is low. I'm going to go into that market. I can make some money. That's what I mean by capitalism.
Okay, so there's two things I want to touch on.
Just before this, what's the poverty rate in the world?
The global poverty rate in the world is 18% of it's 1.1 billion people.
1.1 billion people.
In the world are extreme poverty.
Yeah.
It has dropped by like 0.8%. So it has
0.8%?
Yeah.
But it is the lowest it's ever been, ever.
It is the lowest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're 1 for 2. So 2 things I want to touch on.
Okay.
First, your
Capitalism clips they get the people going. When you clip that stuff up, because you get half the people like me and half the people like you,
I'm
and then
sure
they
you
just
do.
get all the comments. But go ahead.
Incentives. So you didn't touch on what incentives. So I'm assuming when you say
Money.
incentives, you
Money.
mean money.
Money.
Okay. So when you gave that very intelligent sounding quote from
Charlie Munger.
Yes. You're making a sad assumption about human beings, I believe.
Okay.
It's basically saying that if human beings aren't going to be paid for something, then they have absolutely no reason to do anything. So I agree with a system that incentivizes. However, I believe that human beings can be incentivized by much more than money, and I believe that when they are much more they are more motivated to work. So
And some people are like that. Some people are not motivated by money. I agree with you, but there are a lot of people that are motivated by money. And so it's like, I always look at it, I'm a realist. I look at it for what it is, and this is what it is. People in the world, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong. Are there people who are more motivated towards helping others over money? Yes. Unfortunately or not, depending on who you are, the people that run the world are typically speaking the people motivated to get more money, which equates to more power. It's that's my opinion. And they are the people who make the decisions. They are the people who make the rules of the game. And I think overall, are there issues with society that we're living in today? We're talking like more Western culture, let's say for now. Are there issues? Yes, but then I can make the same argument. You're a little bit more left on the spectrum, political spectrum, than I am.
A smidge.
Canada right now, we are last time I checked, we're pretty socialist. Why is the gap?
That's a stretch. So,
but I'll just say this one point. We're okay. If we're not socialists, we're definitely taxed more, generally speaking, than our American counterparts.
Correct.
We're taxed quite high, especially in Quebec, in comparison to other developed nations. That is also true.
Mm-hmm.
The gap between the rich and the poor in Canada has increased, not as much as the U.S. over the past 20 years, but it's getting bigger as well. So this concept of distribution of wealth, we need to have some of it, but and I'm just going to focus on Canada right now, when the machine gets so big, and by machine I mean the government, when all new jobs created, and this is coming from TD, since the onset of the pandemic, when all new jobs created are government jobs, that does not add to productivity to our country. When we have lower productivity, our quality, our standard of living drops. And we can demonize energy, we can demonize oil, we can add all this red tape to new industries for businesses to start and all that kind of stuff. This is not going down a good path. We're not going to have enough. My mind always goes to practicality. It's like a practical way of thinking. If there's no money, we can't have all these social services. So, which goes back to my original point that I just made, which is why I think capitalism is the best system. It's not perfect. It does leave people behind, absolutely. But in the aggregate, it's the best for society. That's my opinion, and a lot of people disagree with me.
The thing is I don't necessarily disagree. I just don't like the labels that we put on certain systems, because you were talking earlier about free market, okay? Free market doesn't exist, and it never has. There's no true free market. There is always regulation some places. It's to what extent is the market regulated.
Yes.
So capitalists, or people that, identify.
What would you
as
call
that.
yourself, by the way?
I wouldn't call myself anything. I would call myself an advocate for a system that works.
Would you say our system doesn't work?
Absolutely, I would say our system doesn't work. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So,
In comparison to what?
you were talking about...
And when you say our system, you're speaking about Canada, right?
I'm speaking about Canada. I'm speaking about the States. I'm speaking about pretty much...
Let's focus on Canada. Let's, because this is a very broad topic. Let's
Yeah.
focus on Canada. So when you say our system doesn't work, why do you say our system doesn't work? In comparison to what? In comparison to countries in Africa? In comparison to Venezuela? I mean, I could tell you I've never been to these places, but... and I bet you'd give the same answer. If you had the choice to live in Canada, where you live right now in Montreal, or live in some random country in the middle of Africa with no running water, I bet you'd pick Canada.
Absolutely.
Like, I think we have it pretty good here.
Yeah,
are there... So what's broken?
So let's put it this way.
Let's get spicy in here, baby. We're getting spicy.
You made the comparison with the States, right?
Yes.
And the States, having inequality that's higher than Canada.
It is.
So the reason I would say that that's the case is because in Canada we are more left than the States.
Yes.
Okay? And that's generally the theme that you get when you start looking at these things. The more left, and I'm using the expression left because for lack of a better one, the more a country cares about its citizens, the more a country does not allow itself to be run by capitalistic interests, the better off that country is in every sphere of life. So,
but you're not offering a solution. You're just saying capitalism bad.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm getting there in the sense that the goal is to reduce inequality. When inequality is reduced, you have a happier population. You have a higher standard of living.
I'm sorry. I just got to cut you off right there.
Please do.
I'm sorry. If inequality is increasing, but the rich are getting richer, the poor are also getting richer at a slower pace. And I'll give you an example. People today, a middle-class person lives better than the richest person in the world 200 years ago. They have running water, they have TV, they have healthcare. They have it's
Yeah, but that's because those technologies exist now.
But the point
I would argue
but
you're
the point
wrong.
I'm just trying to make is that everyone is moving up. The rich are just moving up at a faster rate than the poor. The poor can still live.
Do you know what that creates? That creates a situation in where you have two working parents with children who can't afford to buy a house, whereas 50 years ago, they could buy a massive one.
But I don't think that my opinion on that, especially in Canada, because it is a shit show with regards to housing, my opinion on that is a little bit, yes, wages have not kept up, but also a lot of it due to quantitative easing, printing of money, an oligopoly with the banks and all that kind of stuff. There's a supply issue.
Yeah, but that's a.
But the government is creating this problem.
Why is it the government creating oligopolies? So what you're saying essentially is these companies are too big and they distort the market.
Yes.
It's the government's fault.
Yes, because they do not allow other competitors. They do not allow foreign investors to come into the market.
You think it's the government preventing any competition to Walmart, and not Walmart itself?
The Walmart and major multinational corporations get special treatment. We both agree.
Yes.
How do they get special treatment? By lobbying.
Correct.
When they lobby, they are influencing policymakers.
Okay, now let's
hence my logic to saying it's the government's fault. Sorry,
it's not 100%.
It's not 100% their fault. They are helping to have a different set of rules for the companies that have money and that make it more difficult for small and medium-sized businesses to start.
Absolutely.
It's the barriers to entry in many industries. Again, let's just focus on Canada. We have a lot of red tape in this country. It's very difficult to start a business.
Okay,
interest rates aside, it's just hard to start a business.
So I come up to you on the street and I say, Curtis, you see that guy on the other side of the road? I want you to go stab him in the neck. And you go stab him in the neck.
Okay.
Then a judge, obviously, finds you guilty of murder.
Yeah.
And you're saying that I should get off scot-free. So you're saying that these businesses that are lobbying the government,
Yeah.
it's not their fault. It is the government for being lobbied.
They are, I think that's a bad example. They are like when
Capitalism has created the conditions that need to exist to make it so that these businesses are powerful enough to influence policy.
But then
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But then
it's
you're
a vicious
therefore
circle.
You're therefore arguing that no. Is this your argument that therefore no companies should ever be this big, and that once they hit a certain threshold, example, $1 billion, I'm just throwing a number out there, they should be broken up? Is that your argument?
No,
then?
that's not. And see, that's the capitalistic mentality. That's the capitalistic reaction to things, is to make things all black and white. What I'm saying is that if there is a problem with market accessibility, that it's the problem of the market. So you're saying we have a free market, okay? That was your initial premise. And then when there's barriers to entry, it's not the fault of the market, but the fault of the government.
Would you agree with the fact that big multinational corporations, again, focus on Canada, would you agree with the fact that they lobby government to make the barriers to entry
Absolutely.
more difficult,
Yes.
so that they can keep their market share?
Absolutely.
And as opposed to spending money on research and development, on innovation, on hiring more people, on training,
Yes.
they go, well, we have padded profits. No one else, no competitors can come into our industry. We're going to take this money that we would otherwise spend on capital expenditures, on things that have a positive productivity. As opposed to spending it there, we're going to spend it on lobbying the government because it's just easier. We can pay them to make sure that, so the next political campaign you have, oh, we're going to write you a $5 million check, whatever the hell it is.
Yep.
Like, no one disagrees with the fact that the U.S., Washington, and Ottawa are captured by corporations.
Yes. Now, why is that so you're saying there's this cancer invading our policy.
But you're blaming this on capitalism.
What allowed these businesses to become like this?
Many different reasons. Most of the time, it could be a leader or a group of people that are driven. They're, whether it's power hungry, money hungry. Some people just
that is capitalism, but yes.
Sure, but some people just like to work. It's a competition to them. It's like a sports league. Like, I treat running
that's a problem of its own.
But it is what it is, right? So but you're blaming it. So you're basically just arguing, oh well, they have a lot of money, so it's capitalism's fault that they have a lot of money and that they're able to lobby government. My opinion is, and it's not going to change, but this is just my opinion, is they shouldn't be allowed to influence policymakers to that extent. That's my argument.
Well, I don't disagree with that argument whatsoever. That obviously makes sense. The issue,
but it's not capitalism's fault. It's the policymakers' fault for taking the bribes.
You're right. Okay. So it's the policymakers' fault for allowing themselves to be corrupted by the corruptors. That's like,
okay, fair. I'll agree with that.
The person who plans the murder is not as guilty as the hitman, just because he's the one that pulls the trigger. I would argue, the person that plans it is the most guilty, because if not for him, it would have never happened.
So what would you do?
So what would I do? Basically, you have to regulate these companies so that first of all, you got to go back to the roots of the whole thing. The problem with our system starts a long time ago, when we established the idea of a corporation. Corporations back in the day, and I think we've spoken about this before, corporations were special permissions that were granted by the government on an individual basis to perform a function that was essential to society. You were not allowed to, the key feature of a corporation is obviously to avoid responsibility. And
I wouldn't put it that way.
Well, no, I'm not talking about nowadays with what corporations have become. I'm talking about the establishment of the corporation, the limited liability corporation.
But if you couldn't incorporate businesses, the incentivized would not be aligned to start a new business.
I'm way before that. I agree with you. I agree with you.
Continue,
I'm way before that. What I'm saying is that initially the the reason that a government gave you the permission to avoid liability for your decisions or for what your company did was because the goal of your company was to provide a service that was essential to society. So the first acts of corporations that were given out by the government were to CP to build the railway, were to Hydro-Quebec or the Hudson Bay Company to establish dams and provide society with electricity. You had to limit their liability because what you were asking them to do was extremely risky, but it was necessary to build your society. So that was the original, that was why the corporation, this legal person, what it has become, was created in the first place. The corporation was never designed to be given out willy-nilly to everybody that asked for it, which is what it is now. The idea that you need to be incentivized and you need to have your liability limited.
Well, so if
so that
well,
so that you can become a multimillionaire when you're not providing.
Michael,
let's say your
Michael,
corporation
Michael,
is.
Michael.
Let me give you an example. Let me finish my whole point, if you don't mind.
Fair, sorry, go ahead.
Let's say you're DraftKings or FanDuel.
Okay.
Hope you don't have any sponsors.
No,
and
we don't.
and your the function of your company is to suck out of society their hard-earned dollars by manipulating them and playing on their addictions. Now, that aside, why would I allow you to avoid liability for starting that company?
Personal liability.
You are providing, yes, you are not providing an essential need to society. As a matter of fact, not only are you not providing an essential need, you're actually harming society. Why should you be allowed to avoid personal responsibility? If you want to make billions of dollars doing something that's legal, go for it.
What about alcohol companies?
I would agree with the same. I would
What
say
about
the same
tobacco
thing.
companies?
I would say the same thing.
But then the argument, we went through this already played out when we had the
Let me finish my train of thought.
Sorry. I keep
So when you
interrupting
establish corporations for that purpose, and then look at it now, you see to what point it is the function has been skewed. So corporations now have shareholders. Back then they didn't. When the corporation was thought up, when the idea, when it was created, because it is a legal fiction, a corporation. It is a legal person. It is a creation of our laws. When it was thought up, it was not thought up, and just like Adam Smith's theory on capitalism, they were not thought up with what we have today in mind. So let's say like the American Second Amendment, I believe.
The gun one?
Yeah,
Second Amendment.
Was not thought up with drones in mind.
No.
It was a great idea.
Yeah.
I believe that you should be able to bear arms to defend yourself against an oppressive government.
Yeah.
I don't inherently disagree with that idea. But the problem is we have gotten to a point where that initial justification just doesn't apply anymore. And that's the situation we're at for a corporation. You have shareholders in a corporation. The legal obligation, and again, this is all created. This is made up. So, and I don't mean to say that it's fantasy. What I mean to say is that it's made up and it can be changed.
This is the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a corporation whose board of directors is uniquely and inherently responsible for maximizing profit.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, it is designed to maximize profit at the expense of everybody that is not involved in the corporation. If you have a board of directors and you propose to them, just like they did, and I'll give you a perfect example of this with Ford, you propose to them a strategy that will increase your profits by a certain amount of money, but will harm the environment, but will pollute, they are obligated, as long as what they're doing is not illegal, to put it into practice, regardless of the harm that it causes, because they have an obligation to their shareholders to maximize profit. And if they don't, they can be sued by their shareholders for not doing it. How insane is that when you think about it? What kind of system incentivizes that type of behavior? Now, the example you get classically, and I'm not the first one to think of this, is the Ford Pinto, where the board of directors was presented with information, and it said, and these calculations are available, these internal documents are available. It says how much money it would cost Ford to recall all these vehicles and repair them so that there was no risk of them exploding because they were exploding. That number,
didn't they explode? You would hit if someone
hit you in the back, I believe. The car would explode and kill the passengers. So that amount was, let's say, 10 grand, hypothetically. Then they calculated on the other side of the equation, how much money would we have to pay out if, in the worst case scenario, they all explode and kill everyone inside. Their calculation led them to the fact that it would cost them less money if they left the cars that way than if they recalled and repaired them. And the board of directors said, well, we have to go with the one that is going to be the best for the company. That's
a morally wrong decision.
No, but it's a matter of fact that they are.
I disagree.
That's an extreme example. Don't get me wrong.
I completely disagree with that. And
of
the
course,
shareholders, most shareholders,
didn't disagree with it,
those are like psychopathic people. That's where it's just money.
It's not. That's the problem.
I disagree.
Is that this is what.
I completely disagree.
Yes, the consequences are people dying, and it's maybe not, and that's extremely graphic and on the higher end of the spectrum.
And the board of directors would never be sued for if they made the decision. Morally, that's wrong. They should not have done that. If the board of directors said, "Well, guys, people are going to die," I guarantee you, the shareholders would not be suing the board of directors because they said, you know what, it was going to cost us less money to let the people die. They would not be suing them for that.
It's an extreme example. Okay, tobacco companies hiding the effects. How about that?
I'm not. Look,
Morris tanked their own company because of the effects that they discovered. You don't think that they would have been sued by the shareholders?
There are many examples of corporations doing evil things in the pursuit of profit, but there are just as many examples of governments doing evil things in the pursuit of power.
Oh, I'm not saying that governments are the end all be all.
But it's I feel like you just keep pointing to this utopia that
But my point from the beginning was that we're starting with a system that incentivizes companies to maximize profit regardless the cost.
What's another system? Name me a better system then.
A system where they don't do that.
But then there's no money. There's no money to start the business. If there's no pursuit of profit, if our company is not profitable, I don't have money to pay people to hire more people.
Can't be profitable. There's profitable and then there's excessive.
Okay, I agree with you there.
Ford would still have been profitable had they repaired the cars. That's the difference.
I agree. And then there's a whole pile, and you can fault the system. There's capital flows, and it's basically like, where is capital, which is money? Mm-hmm. Where is capital going to go? Capital is going to go to wherever is going to give it the best return. That's where people are going to put their money. And I agree with you. There are extreme examples of corporations not behaving properly. I totally agree. But it's a much, much, much bigger picture than that. And if we look at the capital markets, I mean, at the end of the day...
What do you think of share buyback?
I know your opinion on share buyback. But this is the thing. You can't... It's very difficult to regulate. I'll give you an example, a small example. In my company...
Difficult to regulate why?
I know what you're going to say, and correct me if I'm wrong. If a company is doing share buybacks... because the board of directors are incentivized they get bonuses based on the share price as opposed to
the actual performance of the company,
as opposed to training capital expenditures, investing in the people and the company itself. If they're incentivized, again, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. If they are incentivized and they're going to get paid bonuses based off of the share price, that can lead to problems, yes. But I'll give you another example. So there's a pro and a con to share buybacks. That is one of the cons.
Okay.
And it doesn't add anything, and you can get basically hostile takeovers, and people on Wall Street used to do this all the time. Carl Icahn's done this, and it's not right, but it's a flaw in the game. Another example, a pro. So let's say for me, if I think
The game that
we
set the rules to.
But let me just finish my point. So let's say for KBD Insurance, if I go, let's say I have some money lying around and I think we're going to have a super profitable next 5 years example. Someone is retiring and I'm going to go, do I want KBD Insurance or do I want Curtis to buy these shares or do I want to sell to someone else? I think that the outlook for the company looks super healthy. I want to partake in that profit that's upcoming. I'm going to do share buybacks. Right now, Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway, they're doing share buybacks because he's going, you know what? We have a pretty good outlook for the company moving forward. I'm not really comfortable investing. He has a big pile of cash. So he has $140 billion of cash just sitting there. What does he do with it? He's not investing in other companies. He's going to go, okay, I'll just do share buybacks. In that scenario, it's not malicious. In other scenarios, I agree with you.
I don't think it's always malicious. And I want to be clear because you gave the example of KBD. Everything that I'm saying does not apply to small and medium-sized businesses at all. Okay. Every point that I'm making applies to multinational corporations because I believe that small and medium-sized businesses are essential to the economy. And if that's all we had, we would be in a much better place.
I agree.
There is no benefit
to
anybody in society except those members of that particular group to a massive corporation. There's no benefit whatsoever.
Yeah.
And what they'll say is, well, there's savings to the consumer. Yeah, there's savings to the consumer at the expense of the 12-year-old child in China making your socks.
And in many cases, like here in Canada, like take telecom, take the banks, take grocery stores, take even more and more insurance.
Yeah.
Life insurance, property and casualty insurance is becoming an oligopoly. Take those examples there. Would you say that we have savings when it comes to our cell phone bill compared to other countries?
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah.
And I agree with you. There's
actually a really interesting thing about, and I look because I came across an advertisement for Ryan Reynolds' company a couple of weeks ago.
The Mint one or
Mobile.
Oh yeah.
So and I think it was on his Instagram or something, and I saw the rates that he's offering for cell phone plans. I'm like, geez, that's interesting, and I like Ryan Reynolds. Let me look it up. It's not available in Canada.
Because the CRTC doesn't let them in.
So do you believe that stems from the CRTC, or does that stem from the lobbyists from Bell and Rogers
and
Videotron?
I think it's a bit
because
of
I think
both.
You know my opinion.
I think it's a bit of both. And
well, it's because
at the end
CRTC
of the day,
is run by former executives of Bell, Videotron, and
there
Rogers.
You go. Like it's the old boys club.
I don't believe that government is the answer to everything because it's true that there is corruption, and it's true that they rarely make decisions that are in the best interest of the public. The problem is that the reason they don't make those decisions is because they're being incentivized by a system that corrupts everything that it touches. And again,
but I keep asking you, and you haven't really given a response yet. If not the system we currently have, for all its flaws, what type of system would you implement?
We don't need to label systems. The best way to go about things is to have goals for a system. You don't.
And the goal right now is to maximize profit. What would be your goal?
To maximize prosperity.
How would you do that?
Taxing and establishing.
We pay taxes.
Yes, of course we pay taxes. But the difference is, and we pay more taxes than the states. We have a better social safety system than the states.
Yes.
We have a better society than the states. The evidence is right there.
I always say, for just a kind of detour here, the U.S. is the best country to live in the world if you have money.
Of course.
If you have money.
Actually,
Yeah.
Every country in the world is the best country to live in if you have money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you say that capitalism has benefited Rwanda or capitalism has benefited India, okay, their gross national product may have gone up. I would venture to guess
that's
that
not how I'm measuring it.
conditions,
That's not how I'm measuring it. And this is
rich,
from
their rich have gotten richer.
Yes, and the poor have also gotten richer. I have the stat right here itself. This is from the Globe and Mail. India's poverty rate dropped from 340. So this is by poverty rate, not by GDP. That's not the calculation, how they're doing this. The poverty rate, I don't know the definition of what the poverty rate is. I think it's like $1 a day or something like that.
Yeah,
India's poverty rate dropped from 340 million to 78 million. This was over a 20-year period. Vietnam's poverty rate, 80% were considered as squatters. This is Singapore. In 1960, 80% were considered as squatters. They're fucking poor. Today, it's one of the richest countries in the world. So
but richest countries in the world as defined by GDP.
As defined by GDP,
exactly.
But when there's more productivity, GDP is just basically how many people are there, how productive are they. If GDP goes up and the GDP per capita has also gone up, again, it's not a perfect calculation. But the main thing, the point I'm just trying to make here is when they allowed foreign investment, when they allowed private ownership, when they started incentivizing people to sell products and services or make new products and new services, it opened up innovation, it opened up research and development, and as opposed to having
opened up exploitation.
It did, but would you rather have a couple of corporations exploiting people here and there, which they do, or have a government exploiting people? Someone's going to exploit someone.
I would rather have none.
I agree.
And
I agree, Mike. I agree. But like, it just goes.
I
it goes back to this.
numbers.
I'll just say this last point.
Yeah.
It just goes back to like my main point. I'm not saying it's perfect.
Yeah.
I'm saying it's the best we got. That's all I'm trying to say.
Well, we could make it slightly better.
We always can.
Yes. And to your last point,
Joey, what do you think? Okay. Yeah. Go.
To your last point, allowing corporations to come in. I mean, these are clear, side effects of globalization. You take a factory from North America because the company doesn't want to pay a wage to a North American worker, and you drop it in Vietnam, you drop it in India, you drop it in Bangladesh, you drop it in China, their GDP is going to go up because there's a new factory. However, if you look at the whole system, there's been no net gain. And as a matter of fact, there's been a net loss because the factory that used to be in North America, where the company was paying their workers our minimum wage, has just been brought to Vietnam, where they're paying 1/100th of that. So who wins? Do you see what I'm saying? It's exactly
You're saying it's a zero-sum game?
Well, no. A zero-sum game is just mathematics. I'm saying that they're making it into worse than a zero-sum game.
But zero-sum is just if there's a winner here, there's a loser here. That's zero-sum.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about between the public and the company, yeah, it's a zero-sum game, and the company wins all the time. So it's just like Amazon.
But it's
like
still,
a state.
but it benefits the consumer. If I can provide lower cost products and services than my competitors, the consumer wins. They have more disposable income to do other things. They have more disposable income to have a better quality of life. They have more disposable income.
You know what also gives the consumer more disposable income? Don't pay them $1 a day.
Yes, but people, that's just not realistic.
Why is that not realistic? Why is
you're talking about no? Excuse me, I misunderstood what you said. I was referring to it's unrealistic to expect people to not buy shit online. That was my point, but I misunderstood your point. You're saying child labor.
Yeah, no, but that's a whole other problem with our culture, our need to consume.
That's a whole other
conversation.
I don't. That's kind of human nature and all that psychology and all that kind of stuff. But anyways,
human nature. But yes.
But for okay, so you're saying $1 a day, child labor. It's not good. I agree, but.
Not just child labor.
But the wages, over time, wages will go up, even in China, and this is adjusted for inflation. The average wage in China for factory workers has also gone up. Yes. It has.
That is a skewing of the stats. Now, while you're right, I agree, the average has gone up.
Yeah.
What I would prefer to look at is the difference in CEO pay to workers, which has shot up by somewhere in the neighborhood of like 300% since the 1960s.
It's crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So And these CEOs, by the way, they're not doing anything more. As a matter of fact, they're still doing nothing.
I completely disagree.
I'm sure you do, but that's a hyperbole. Like they're obviously
saying,
doing something.
That's
I don't mean they're doing nothing.
That's like, it doesn't make a difference. Curtis, go run Intact tomorrow. No. I could not run Intact the way the CEO does.
I understand. What I'm saying is while their tasks have maybe gotten more complex, I don't believe you can justify that pay disparity with the workers that are making your company what it is. So
that's fair. But then it always goes. So what? But what's the solution? So here, I'll give you an example.
The solution is to change the incentive.
But I'll give you an example for me. If I want to get, there's an EBITDA margin for insurance brokers, like the big insurance brokers. There's an EBITDA margin of you need to run. EBITDA is your profit margin. We'll call it that. There's a margin you need to run that's typically speaking, the well-run brokerages are going to go anywhere from 25 to 35% profit margin. Okay. This is after paying all their salaries, everything. If I don't, and this is going to be a great point for you to come in after because the incentives, if I don't get those margins, investors will not come to me. They will go to other brokers that will give them the industry standard margins. That's where the money will go.
Yeah.
I lose out. I'm not able to hire more people. I'm not able to create more jobs, and it's going to go somewhere else. So again, this is the system. I'm not saying it's perfect, but like what am I supposed to do?
Again, my points don't apply to medium and small businesses.
But why
That's
not?
The problem because it's all these principles, all these capitalistic principles are much more valid when you're talking about a small and medium-sized business, especially one that supports its workers. Do you know what I'm saying? That is the goal at the end of the day, is to have a company that's well-run, that provides its workers with the basics and what they need. That is the goal. The issue is the excess and the point to which the companies are designed to maximize profit for the sake of maximizing profit, not to benefit necessarily anyone within the company. It's just to maximize at all costs. That's the problem. Your situation, and it also creates, giant corporations also create a disconnect between the people making the decisions and the consequences. It creates these both physical and legal barriers to appreciating what your decisions, the consequences of your decisions and the effect of your decisions. So a CEO like, who was it, TELUS, that let go 7,000 people the other day, something along those lines. I'm fairly positive that board of directors did not have to meet with one single person that they let go.
Guaranteed.
Okay. If you have to let somebody go, I'm assuming you have to meet with them. Or I'm assuming you will. You will, not you have to.
It depends on the scenario, but if I'm not their direct, no, there's instances where I would not.
Okay.
Because I'm stepping, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'm stepping. It drops the credibility of. Let's say there's let's say it goes manager me.
Now that's
the other
like a
employees,
managerial.
The other employees won't take that manager seriously. They're gonna go, oh,
Understood.
you need Curtis to do the dirty work.
Understood.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now that's kind of throwing a different element into it, but there's still a proximity between you and the person that you're letting go.
I'll be in the same. I'll be in the same office.
You know them.
Yes.
You care about them.
Yes.
To a certain extent, and those human aspects are completely removed when you're dealing with a giant multinational corporation. None of those human attributes factor in at all, and it's because of the structure that's been created to maximize profit and to reduce as much as possible any cost, regardless of the consequences. And another example is like, the effect that these companies have on society, like some of the big electric car makers, or like Amazon, asking states and cities to bid on where they can build their factory and to give them as many tax breaks, basically to bid on tax breaks that they'll give them. To me, that is absolute insanity. If Amazon decides to build a factory, it's because it's going to be profitable for them to do so. It should be profitable for them to do so, regardless of any tax breaks being received. If it's not, they shouldn't be building it.
So are you? I agree.
All that money that Amazon paying zero federal income tax in the States, all that money, just taxing of Amazon, just taxing Apple, and not allowing them to avoid taxes through third-party corporations in
Ireland,
the Cayman Islands,
yeah.
the Isle of Man, just taxing them would literally cure world poverty. The amount of money that it would take,
I don't know about that, but go ahead.
Let's say world hunger. The amount of money that would be obtained from charging Apple the same tax as your company pays,
yes,
would literally solve world hunger.
So I agree.
And the fact that we don't do that is crazy. Let's seriously think about it. If Apple's profits are astronomical, which they are,
yes,
and we take a little portion of that profit and we give it to the have-nots, and we can eliminate starving babies. The fact that we don't do that speaks volumes about our society, in my opinion.
I think it's a lot more complex than that.
It is. I'm not saying it's not.
So let me ask you this question. So I agree with you on this. These multinational corporations should be paying their fair share. They have the most expensive lawyers, the most expensive tax lawyers, the most expensive accountants to get around these rules. So are you therefore arguing for more regulation then,
Absolutely.
or less regulation?
More.
Okay, so that's
regulation, taxation.
That's what I thought you would say.
And that's what you were trying to steer me.
This is what happens in practice. So I always come back to what is going to actually happen in real life. What are we actually dealing with? What's going to happen is this. They're going to add more regulation, and guess what? These multinational corporations are not going to have to abide by this new regulation, and who is it going to affect? Small and medium-sized businesses. When you pass laws for corporations, it's not. There's no difference between the sizes, but between KBD Insurance and Videotron.
Let me chime in for a second.
Yeah.
And that is the brilliance of multinational corporations, is that they've convinced the government that they are the same. They've convinced the government and the population that they are the same as small and medium-sized businesses.
But this comes back to this.
Give me a second.
Yes, sir.
So when they advocate and when they lobby and when they talk to the population, they are garnering support from members of those small and medium-sized businesses. When corporations are saying this law would be bad for business, what they're saying is this law would be bad for them, but they're applying it, they're rallying small and medium-sized business into that them. And what that does is it garners them the support of the entire business community. And actually, it makes it so that the people that are part of these small and medium-sized businesses are actively advocating for laws that will hurt them, that will help giant corporations, that will hurt them.
But this is why, and I'm going to tell you why. So you're arguing for more regulation. I think less regulation, not in all scenarios, but I'm going to stick to Canada here. Okay, I'll tell you why. I think less regulation will help small and medium-sized businesses. I'll tell you why. If the policymakers pass more regulation, as we both agreed to, the big multinational Canadian corporations are not going to have to abide by those new rules anyways. The small and medium-sized businesses are going to have to abide by these new rules. if in practice that's going to be the outcome of more regulation, I am therefore arguing that we should be deregulating.
Are you talking about taxation? Because there's different. Like
I'm talking about I'm talking
elsewhere.
about all of it. I'm talking about barriers to entry, permits, taxation for sure, foreign investors. Like there's all these things that it should be easier in Canada to start a new business. And
yes, it's
difficult enough. I mean, the banks don't, in comparison to other banking systems in different countries, we lend, the stat I gave you earlier, according to the OECD, and because we didn't say this on the air, according to the OECD, Canadian banks, their lending is only to 12%. 12% of the lending goes to small and medium-sized businesses. But I'll just finish my point. In comparison to other countries, 37 other't like Western developed nations, whereas the number is 44% lending to small and medium-sized businesses. Mm-hmm. So if they allowed, I'll finish my thought. If deregulation, and by deregulation, I mean other competitors can come in, taxes, permits, all this kind of crap. If other competitors, other banks could come in, small business, I still can't get a loan from a fucking bank. I can't get a loan. Mm-hmm. If other competitors were to come in, I guarantee you, if there was 1,000 banks in Canada, I would be able to get a loan.
Yes, most likely.
That is what deregulation would do for small and medium-sized businesses.
Okay.
So that's my. Did I explain that clearly?
Yeah, you did, and I agree with you. The problem is that we assume the status quo. Like we say that it's the way it is and it can't change, but that's not the case. So the reason that these banks don't lend to small and medium-sized businesses is because they don't have to. They're not being forced to.
I agree.
But what that does, and it goes back to the fact that a corporation, especially one that's massive, should be of net benefit to society. The goal of a bank, the reason why banks became a thing, was to lend money to small and medium-sized businesses.
That's our system.
To put them on the same playing field.
Yeah.
By giving them loans.
The banks are, I'll just add this in and I agree, the banks are the bedrock to Canada.
Yeah.
Our banking system is the bedrock to how everything works.
Mm-hmm. And while there's benefits to the banks refusing, to lend money to something that's risky, both, micro and macro stages, they're also not fulfilling their initial purpose. The whole purpose of a bank is to stimulate the economy. That's why they were created.
Yes.
And they are now not doing that, and instead are just profit machines.
But so are you arguing that having policymakers, the government, force them to loan more would be more effective than allowing competitors into the market?
I'm not prepared to say one way or another which one would be most effective. I think both. I think both would be the ideal. And
I'm loving this conversation, by the way.
So, and that's a perfect way to show how the consumer suffers, okay? Because the consumer of a bank is a small and medium-sized business. It is an individual citizen. Yeah. And they suffer because these banks are so big that they don't have to take risks because they're just raking in money. Yeah. And it's the same thing. So the classic example that I always give.
And you're a good person to talk about this. You worked at TD.
Yeah, I did for 6 years. So, and I have absolutely no loyalty towards them, as one can probably tell from this conversation. The prime example of how like a giant corporation without regulations distorts the economy is Amazon with this company. I believe it's called 1-800-Diapers. So 1-800-Diapers was...
Diapers.com, I heard.
Was it Diapers.com? Yeah. Diapers.com was a family-run business owned by this guy who wanted to leave his business to his children. So it was a company that sold diapers online in large quantities. Yeah. Amazon wanted to buy his business. Yeah. And he consistently refused because it was something that he had established and he took pride in, that he wanted to leave to his kids. So what Amazon did is they started selling the same diapers for much cheaper, for a loss, to the point where they bankrupt his company and then purchased it in bankruptcy.
Yeah, he was forced to sell, yeah.
So which is, by the way, completely illegal.
What's it called again?
Antitrust.
No,
it's in violation of antitrust.
It's something else, because car manufacturers used to do the same thing.
Well, in Canada, it's called the Competition Act. In the States, it's called antitrust legislation.
It's basically like, well, I know I can lose money for 4 years. I know you can only lose money for 2 years. I'll do this, and you'll be out of the market.
So, I think I just unplugged something.
Oh, yeah.
How far are we at here, Joey?
We're hour 20.
Gee. What time is it?
It's 12:20.
12:20. Okay.
Can you hear yourself okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason why they are allowed to do this in the States, it's actually a gray area in the law, is that, and I'm talking about the States, and it's probably the same in Canada, but I don't want to assume, is that as long as the consumer benefits, they can never be charged with a breach of antitrust legislation or a breach of the Competition Act. And the business, and they know this. So the problem with that is that once Amazon bought this company in bankruptcy, they then increased the prices. I'm not going to say exponentially, but the expression exponentially, to recuperate the loss that they had. So in the end, it did not benefit the consumer. It's just when they're analyzing whether they broke the law, at that point, it had benefited the consumer for a short period of time. So these companies basically, well, they're natural. And the reason Amazon did this is because it made financial sense. Because they can declare a loss, save on taxes, and then make the money back later. And that is in no way beneficial to anybody that is not associated with Amazon. And as a matter of fact, it's detrimental.
I would argue, though, in a marketplace that has multiple, not a monopolistic marketplace, and a marketplace that has, in certain industries we do, an oligopolistic or monopolistic marketplace. If we don't have that, that won't happen, because as soon as they start gouging the consumer's just going to go to a store that has cheaper diapers.
Theoretically, you're correct that if we didn't have that.
But it goes back to my same point, is that if the barriers to entry are easier, that smaller business or multiple smaller businesses will always come in, or most of the time it will come in. It's not good to have, I agree, like if you have a monopoly on the market, because they can charge whatever the fuck they want to charge. I agree that's bad, but it just comes back to my main point. I argue for deregulation. We need a certain amount of regulation.
We're arguing it for the same end result.
Yes.
We're just saying that you
different ways of getting there.
And my point is that deregulation is too dangerous because we've tried it before. As a matter of fact, in Reagan and Nixon days, we tried that. Before the Great Depression, we tried that, and it shot the country into the Great Depression. And the only thing that got the states out of the Great Depression was that there happened to be a war where...
Yeah, but Reagan, you could argue with Reagan. I mean, the economy was booming. It was a very prosperous time in the United States when
not following
Reagan,
his presidency.
Yeah, but that's just the cycle of a market, Michael.
I mean, it's coincidental that the cycles of the markets happen to go down after the most right-wing,
I'm not saying that there are not going to be market crashes when there's deregulation. I am not saying that, but there are normal cycles to markets. They go up, they go down. Interest rates go up, interest rates go down. It's impossible to have a straight line. And any single time, if someone wants to have a straight line, it's usually a government coming in going, "Oh, I'm going to make sure that we don't grow too fast, we don't grow too little." It's basically just everyone becomes equally poor. There's been many examples of that.
Yeah, but the market system that we have is designed to suck money out of the majority of the population. It's a money concentration system. So yes, we have times where markets go up and down. The problem is that when you say markets go up and down, we're giving the impression that it all evens out in the end type thing. The problem is that in practice, that's not what happens. In practice, the haves benefit from markets going down. The have-nots don't. It is the haves that have money that can afford to invest when there's a crash.
But this is the system.
But what I'm saying is if you made your system more equal, you wouldn't have these problems. And you can look at it from a giant corporation standpoint versus small and medium-sized
When you say more
businesses.
equal, because I really want to pin you down on this, and I know it's a nuanced question. When you say more equal, are you just referring to tax that everyone should pay the same tax?
Money, tax, opportunity.
Make the same rules for everybody.
Yes.
Is
correct.
that when you're saying a more equal system? That's
Yes.
all you're saying?
Yes.
So you're basically, in another way, you're saying, I don't want to have the multinational corporations to get special treatment.
Correct.
That's all you're saying when you say equal system?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is so if we didn't allow multinational corporations to avoid paying taxes, the entire population would benefit. If you want things to stay the same, then the entire population could pay virtually no tax, because the amount that the entire population pays in tax probably does not equal what, as a matter of fact, I'm fairly confident in saying, does not come close to what taxing the corporations would. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you tax Apple,
I have no idea what that number is.
neither do I, but if you tax these companies at the rate that individuals pay, individual tax rates would absolutely plummet.
So are you arguing for and Janet Yellen was trying to do this, they were trying to get all nations, like pretty much every country in the world, they were trying to get everyone to charge a flat tax rate. Everyone charges the same rate.
I mean,
is that what you're arguing for? Because
I
again,
don't necessarily know if that's a good idea. It's just to stop, it's just to close these loopholes that these companies use, and that requires regulation.
so what about a city like Dubai where there's no, or a state like Florida? You love Florida. So what about a state like Florida that has no income tax?
Right.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, see, the problem with things like that is that's why Florida has zero social services.
And you think that's bad?
Well, of course. It's all. So if you look at the states, okay, and if you look at countries in general, the countries with the lowest tax rates tend to be the worst countries to live in.
If you're poor.
Correct. I'm not talking about the 10% of rich people. I'd rather address
Well,
the
what
90.
about what? Okay, well, I'll argue with that. What
Look
about
at the States.
What about Dubai? There's no tax there. There's very low crime rate.
Yeah.
High
Have you ever been?
prosperity. I have not.
Have you seen the class of slaves that they have running their country in Dubai and Qatar?
I have not.
That's what those countries are. So I just got back from Qatar a couple of months ago, and when you go there, you don't see any Qataris. You don't see them. Their country is run by poor migrants that come there to make slave wages. The entire service industry in Qatar is brown people. That's all you see.
When you say service, like restaurants, stuff like that? or-
Restaurants, taxis, hotel staff, security, everything.
They're all Indian.
It's all Bangladeshi, Pakistani, mostly those because they're Muslim. So when they make the transfer to Qatar,
Yeah. But they're there. You could argue that they left their country, and most of the time when people leave their country, it's because they think there's a better opportunity
of course there's a
somewhere
better
else.
opportunity. It doesn't mean that it's the
So-
opportunity that they should have.
A
Better opportunity than in Bangladesh is not drinking polluted. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's easy to have a better opportunity. It doesn't necessarily mean they're being treated fairly. So what I'm saying is these countries like Qatar and Dubai project this amazing situation onto the world. It's literally a country that has slavery. You saw how many people died building the World Cup stadiums.
What's the country you look up to the most?
Probably
That you think is the most equitable?
I mean, Canada's great, but probably the Nordic countries.
And the Nordic, so let's take
I mean, they have the lowest crime rates.
small populations. I think that's part of making it, well, in comparison to like the US, I think it makes it a little bit easier
we have
to.
a small population too.
But it's like a very homogeneous same values, I guess you could say. It's not like a melting pot of the US, a lot of different values.
Yeah.
And let's not forget too, in the Nordic countries, they got a hell of a lot of oil that helps finance a lot of their welfare
so does
state.
the U.S.
It's not owned by the government. It's owned by private corporations. The oil in, I forget which country, there's which I believe it's the Netherlands or maybe Norway. The state owns the oil, and that helps finance a lot of their social services.
Well, that's lovely. Why don't we do that here?
We do for SAQ.
Yeah.
We do for Hydro-Quebec.
Yeah.
We do for... I mean, SAQ, last time I checked, it produces $2 billion in profit per year, just funneled back into the system.
Yeah. Now, that's a laudable thing to strive for. That's why Hydro-Quebec is so successful. Hydro-Quebec supplies multiple states and multiple provinces with electricity.
So what do you say, though, to other countries that own the natural resources?
Well,
where the state owns...
But if there's corruption, it doesn't work, clearly.
But like, my point always comes down to, at this point in time, it's being used responsibly. The profits are being used responsibly in countries, in the Nordic countries, the oil profits.
Yeah.
My argument is, until when? Until it doesn't anymore.
Okay. So
and when they have that much, when a state or a corporation, same thing, it's a person at the end of the day. And the motives, you could have a psychopath, you could have a power-hungry guy, you could have, there's all kinds of things that can happen. And when they have that much power, it's like, I'm not arguing, I always argue for privatization because I don't trust the state as much as other people do. That's always my argument.
So my counter to that would be, I would much rather risk the government being in control of something, because at least theoretically...
A Western government, not a government in Africa.
Either way.
Really?
Okay. So I would rather the government be in control of something, because at least theoretically, the goal of the government is to help the people. The corporation is designed to only help the few. So...
But this is where, like, we have... But I just want to interject.
Hang on. Let me just finish this point. It's going to take 10 seconds.
No problem.
The government being corrupt is something that can happen and something that does happen.
Yeah.
But that's not its design. The corporation is designed to be corrupt. It's designed to look for only its interests.
I think this is where we have a fundamental difference in philosophy. My view of the government, it's not this in practice, but my view of the government, it's more libertarian. I think they should be there just to protect my rights. I want them to, leave me alone.
Your rights, they have to regulate. That's the whole point. That's how your rights are protected, by laws.
I'm going to get in trouble. I'm not going to say this.
Say it.
No, I'm not going to say it. I have a business. But I was thinking, I was like trying to, how do I say this? I'm like, no, I'm not going to say that. Where do you think we agree?
I think we agree that there's a problem. I think we disagree on how to fix it. And I think the reason we disagree on how to fix it is because we think the causes are maybe different, or we weigh some of the causes as more important than others in bringing about the situation we have.
I would agree. There's
another one.
I'm sorry?
Nothing.
No, I think we agree a lot more than we disagree, and it's just like, I agree how to fix the issue going on right now. And there's like a dark cloud over Canada right now, and a lot of people, they're having trouble affording day-to-day life. Debt's insane. People can't afford a home.
Yep.
They're not building new homes, and that's not a lot of people just go, well, get the construction companies to build. It's the municipalities that give out the permits to build. And our construction buddy there was telling me the other day, to build 1 unit of housing, not a house, a unit, like a condo, just in taxes, it's costing $200,000 just in the tax, which is obviously passed on to the consumer. And then there's the actual labor and materials cost to build it. So all these costs.
So why is that a disincentive to the company? to build if the taxes are going to be passed on to the consumer?
It's for rental housing because they can't, once they build it, they have to have a certain cost. And then with rent control, they can't pass on the costs to, it's not a
God
profitable
forbid.
project.
God
Well, no,
forbid.
but they're not going to start a project where they're going to lose money, Michael, unless you want to do government housing. And government housing, we all know how efficient they are at building because they're not building right now.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to go ahead and build government housing, go ahead and do it. They're not doing it.
Okay.
So like we're kind of just stuck in a problem right now. It's so expensive to build. If they were to incentivize the developers, all they would have to do is just take off the HST. It's about 13% off the top. If they could take that off, they're still getting their taxes, and that's a lot of tax. There's and a lot of the
I would disagree with the main premise.
but municipalities, like how they're funded, generally speaking, is off property tax. That's, I think, the biggest
Yeah.
revenue generator
Most
for
likely.
municipalities.
Yeah,
I'm
and
pretty
probably
sure.
parking tickets. Yeah.
Or in parking tickets, yeah.
I'm not joking. It is a lot of money.
Yeah. I don't know what the facts are, but yeah, it just comes back to like the main point. There's
And that's another parking tickets, and I'd like to touch on this because that's another element that we do here that some other countries do differently, is that regardless of how much money you make, your parking ticket is, I don't know what it's at now, like $54.
like no more. It went up. It's
More?
like $90 downtown.
Okay, so regardless of how much money you make, that's what the parking ticket costs. In other countries, namely like the Nordic ones, your parking tickets are based on your income. So if you make $10 million, there was like a famous photo on Facebook that was circulating that like this Swedish billionaire had a parking ticket for $26,000. And it makes sense because if I was a billionaire and I could avoid the stress of parking for $54 or $90,
Yeah, you're gonna
I would
do
it every
People
single
do it all the time.
Every
You don't
time.
care. Just pay the 10 parking tickets once a month. Just pay $500 or whatever.
But that's so. Why shouldn't it be as a function of your income? And if we start with that premise, why shouldn't sales tax be a function of your income? Why shouldn't
is.
income tax?
It is.
Yes, to a certain point. Why is it that someone who makes 150 grand is taxed the same percentage that someone who makes 150 million?
Oh, this is a big debate. What's your opinion on the wealth tax?
Uh,
That has not passed, but that they're floating.
I don't know enough about it, but any tax on people that have excessive amounts of money is something that I support.
So wealth tax is essentially on the uber wealthy. They haven't defined what uber wealthy is. They want to tax not their income, their net worth.
Okay. So my whole philosophy on when the point you made was, or the question you asked was, do you think it's theft? And I said, absolutely not. And the reason being is that these companies, okay, let's call a spade a spade, okay? And I'll talk about myself and I'll talk about my entourage as an example. We're not exceptional in any way whatsoever, okay?
Maybe in debating.
We're not geniuses. We're
No.
not Albert Einstein. You know what I mean? And yet we're successful.
Yeah.
The reason why two fuck-ups were able to achieve what they've achieved is because of the advantages provided to us by the place that we're living. So let me give you an example here, okay? One of us, okay, with no exceptional skill starts a company in Canada and makes it big, okay? Or let's not even say starts. Let's push the example further. Let's say inherits, okay? Somebody inherits a company from the hard work that their grandparents did, okay? And that's kind of my situation. The reason I'm in my particular situation is because my grandfather came here and started a business and was successful. If he hadn't, I would not have what I have. And to think that my grandfather came here because he would be able to do just that, because this place would allow him to succeed when the place where he came from would not. So to say that my grandfather and his descendants, who actually didn't do any work and had nothing to do with the establishing of the company, do not have to pay their fair share to the society that allowed them to establish that wealth in the first place, to consider that as theft is, in my opinion, and with all due respect, completely ridiculous. So you establish a company.
But the reason, I just want to chime in here. The reason I say that, theft was probably not the right word when it comes to taxes. At what point is it too much? So we can take the same example, and you're making a good example.
At what point is their wealth too much?
But then if the
what is enough?
But it's a subjective opinion.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not a subjective opinion. How much is too much? When there's a large portion of society that can't make ends meet, that can't afford housing, it's not an opinion as to how much one person should have. I believe it's actually immoral for somebody to have so much when some people have so little.
My logic is the following. When the government comes in, I'm not saying we should abolish taxes. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
But when it gets excessive, when the government comes in and takes the money to redistribute the wealth, it is not redistributed efficiently at all.
Agreed.
At all.
Agreed. And do you know why it's not redistributed efficiently?
Because governments, there's no incentive for them to do it. It's not their money.
Because they're controlled by corporate interests.
I disagree with that. I think that
government's tax dollars
I have a friend that works for the government, and this is just one example.
You mean me? Or?
No,
Okay.
She works for the government, and I'm not trying to shit on all government workers. There are some that work hard, I'm sure.
I sincerely hope not. I'm sitting right here.
She doesn't work. She laughs about it. She goes, I can't believe this is actually a job. She got hired over COVID. She works about an hour a day, and there's no accountability. Her bosses right now are both on vacation, and because her bosses, it's not their business. They don't care about the outcome of this person's productivity. They don't care because it's not theirs. So this is why I think a little bit, it's a nuanced situation. I agree that the wealth is not redistributed efficiently. Probably, I would agree with that statement you just made, partly because of the rules set up for multinational corporations. I would also say that just government in itself is not efficient because it's not their money. There's no incentives for them to be.
Agreed.
Like, when was the last time we had a balanced budget, for Christ's sake?
There's no doubt that they could be more efficient. But at the end of the day, even with their inefficiency, if we taxed Apple, we could provide everything to everyone.
This is where we disagree again, because I don't think throwing more money at the issue is going to solve anything.
Well, clearly, it's very convenient to have that position, and I'm not saying you, but it's very convenient for somebody in a multinational corporation to have that position when that position means that they get to keep billions of dollars. It's very nice.
So you agree with the wealth tax?
Absolutely.
So,
I don't see why I wouldn't.
But
if you've
practice,
inherited a company...
okay, but what if this is what would happen, again, in practice?
Yeah.
On paper, tax them. So let's say you're worth $1 billion. We both agree with the fact, if you're worth $1 billion, how much of that is liquid cash? Probably 5 million, 10 million. He doesn't have $1 billion cash.
No, of
right?
course not. It's based in the value of the company.
Most of the time, it's based in the company.
Yeah.
So if you get taxed, let's just say 10% every single year on a wealth tax, are you saying that he's gonna have to liquidate 10% of his shares every single year just in order to pay that tax? How are they going to value the company? I'm not talking about publicly traded stocks. That's easy. What about a company like myself?
There's no doubt that there's problems with it.
Who's going to be the arbiter to determine the value of that company? There's so many holes.
Well, you're asking questions that are so economically complicated to someone that doesn't have the ability to answer them. But what I'm saying is, and I can easily see the problems with something like that.
Yes.
And so I'm saying I don't necessarily agree with this wealth tax. I agree with the concept of taxing people that are worth more money than they'll ever need, than their children will ever need, than 8 generations down will ever need, at the expense of the rest of the population. I'm not in a position where I think I deserve more, in that I think those tax dollars should be kicked down to me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that especially it's skewed, like when you start your own company and you build it up from the ground up, and it's there, it exists because you made it and nobody else had the ability to do it. Then I could see where you could get into territory where you're like, well, why should I pay more than someone else? I worked harder than them. And that's totally fine. But that doesn't exist anymore. Nobody creates a business from the ground up anymore because it's impossible.
Tech.
Fine.
Maybe not
Some.
so much anymore, but tech 20 years ago.
Some, yeah. What we have now is just people holding on to crazy wealth. And not only is that damaging directly because we don't have that money in the government, it's damaging indirectly as well, and I'll explain how. First, let's say, and I understand your concept of inefficiency, and you're totally right. However, you tax Apple $10 billion and only $1 billion gets given to the population and the rest gets lost in government bureaucracy. I'd rather that than Apple have it, to be completely honest. And so that's the direct effect. The indirect effect, and now I think I've lost my train of thought. No, the indirect effect comes down to it is economically inefficient for billionaires to exist. And the CEO, I don't know if he's still the CEO, I don't think he is, but one of the previous CEOs of Starbucks put it perfectly.
Howard Schultz.
Yeah. Our whole economy is based on consuming.
Yeah.
If we don't consume, the thing falls apart.
Yes.
So what his point was, I have $10 million. I own 5 pairs of jeans. Why? Because I don't need any more pairs of jeans. I physically won't be able to wear more pairs of jeans. So the money that I don't spend on having 7,000 pairs of jeans that I can afford just goes into stock and just sits there. Whereas if I was taxed, and now I'm not attributing these comments to him, but if he were taxed more and that wealth was in different ways redistributed, whether it be in the form of social services, childcare, things that allowed the population to make more money, all of those people with his $10 million that have been taken in tax would each buy 1 pair of jeans. So that would be 10 million pairs of jeans instead of 5. That is beneficial to the economy because it's consumption and it moves the economy along. So it comes back to the debate that all capitalists like to bring up, is that the concept of trickle-down economics, which has been proven time after time to be a complete fallacy and fabrication to suit their interests. Trickle-down economics does not work. You give a company more money, they do not give all that money back to their workers. It does not happen. As a matter of fact, they are probably just as inefficient as the government when you give them money.
No, they're not.
Yes, I'm sure they are.
No.
A stock buybacks is a perfect example of that.
I gave my opinion on stock buybacks where there's pros and there's cons. Do you think, I have a lot of thoughts going through my head. Do you think there are people that will always excel, no matter, you could put these types of people on an island and they'll just build shit like.
There are some very talented people, yes. They're a minority.
Do you think that no matter what you throw at a certain level of the population in terms of social services, in terms of money, in terms of checks, you need $1,000, this universal basic income, whatever you want to call it, do you think there's a certain percentage of the population that no matter what you throw at these people to try and help them, they will never pull themselves out of poverty? I think there is, no matter what.
So,
and I know that's a pretty strong statement, and I'm not trying to shit on these people. Let's exclude the people with the drug addicts, the alcoholics. That is,
you're excluding a large amount of people.
I know.
Right?
But what I'm saying is, like, it's going to be a hot take. There are losers in society.
Okay.
There are. And no matter what you throw at these people, they'll always be a loser. That's my point.
Mm-hmm. I would argue, okay, and I accept your point. I would argue that the majority of people that would benefit from being provided with money and opportunity is much greater than the losers. And I'm okay with some losers getting money if it benefits the rest and the majority.
So do you think in Canada, when people are struggling to make ends meet, when most people, the average person, is living paycheck to paycheck, that we should be taxed even more? Or are you saying that no?
I don't think we should be taxing more.
You're saying just the multinational, the big
correct.
Corporations should be taxed more
because they're not taxed.
That's your whole. That's like the premise, the argument.
I don't think that small and medium-sized businesses should be taxed more. As a matter of fact, I think they should be taxed less, and I think individual people should be taxed less. I think income tax should be lower, and it can be lower. It can't be if we don't increase corporate tax. Multinational corporate tax, because then we don't have the money to sustain our society.
Because we can't, like, let's actually try and solve this. It's a very complicated situation. We're obviously not going to change the system as what it is today. That's not going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, or probably in our lifetime. How the hell do we fix this then? Because I know you're just saying, well, just tax them, but why aren't they doing that already? How the hell does this get fixed?
Because corporations are more powerful than the government. Because corporations, what they've done is they've convinced society to act against their own interests. Just like I was saying before, corporations have convinced...
But you're arguing to change the system, which is not realistic. How do we fix the problem we have today? It's not.
It is. If people understood...
You want to tear it down and restart.
So you don't think it's realistic to believe that the majority of our population would support taxing Apple, for which they have absolutely no affiliation, the majority, to be able to address many social
I
ills.
agree. I agree. But what I'm saying is...
And we live in a democracy, therefore if most people support it,
the politicians just won't do it. How do we get them to tax Apple? How do we get them to tax Amazon?
It's a system that things have to be done at the same time. So when you start doing those things, you are when you start regulating these companies and you start taxing these companies, what you're also doing is you're removing their power at the same time. So it's a double taxing them is one effect. The second effect is that you're decreasing their power. You're decreasing their ability to hold the government hostage.
Yeah, their influence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when a corporation can convince a population, it's kind of like it's kind of like the Republicans do in the States. Okay, the Republicans convince,
but not the Democrats.
No, well, the Democrats in the States are a right-wing party. They are. Okay. If you look at the spectrum of right versus left, where the Democrats fall is left of the Republicans.
Yes.
That's like saying Paul Bernardo is better than Ted Bundy. Technically, yes. But what they do is they convince the population, their greatest power is convincing the population to act against their best interests. So they convince the population. Republicans are probably, for a large majority, poor. They're in states that are poor, and yet they've convinced them to side with Republicans who cut corporate taxes and don't forgive student loan debt. How have they done that? When the majority of Republicans voters, and the majority of voters in general,
but
would benefit.
The student debt part is because the government guarantees those loans. That's why they don't let you declare bank. You have to keep it on your file. It's because the government has the
correct.
Has
but these student debt companies were predatory. So why is it the government that has to take the fall?
Well, the government created that problem. The government created that problem because the loans were guaranteed. So if you have a loan that's guaranteed, you're going to loan as much as you can. Okay. It's guaranteed by the government.
So what do you think about corporate bailouts?
I think they're terrible.
Okay.
I think they're stupid.
Are they capitalistic?
No,
they're not.
They're not.
Okay. And why do we do them?
It looks good on the surface. It looks good on paper when a politician, you can take the example of Bombardier, take the example of Air Canada, when these companies should be going bankrupt because they're not.
You think it looks good as a politician? when they bail out a company?
Trudeau,
I don't think it looks good to the rest of society.
You and I can see through the fog, but what I'm saying is most people, Trudeau, when he made the announcement, we bailed out Bombardier, whatever the amount was, and then the board of directors took big fat bonuses. He spun it as, look how many jobs we just saved. And in the short term, he's right. He did save a lot of jobs in the short term. But what has to happen, you have to let these companies go bankrupt. It's not like all of the assets are just going to disappear. What's going to happen is when these types of companies go bankrupt, because they're not being run properly, and because the government gives a backdrop, they should go bankrupt. Are people going to lose jobs? Yes. But what's going to happen, another company from somewhere else, whether with a healthy balance sheet, is going to come in, buy the assets 10 cents on the dollar or whatever it is, and they're going to start up all over again, and the airline is going to be just fine within a year or 2 years. That's what's going to happen. And these governments don't let capitalism take its natural course. It looks good on paper to save 30,000 jobs.
And that's the problem with capitalism.
But that's not capitalism,
capitalism.
Michael. I disagree with you there. This is the government sticking their nose in and stopping capitalism from taking its natural course.
So in our society now, we have a capitalistic system for the poor and socialism for the rich. So whenever the rich need a bailout, they get it. Whenever poor people do,
and I'm not advocating for that. I'm saying they shouldn't.
But what I'm saying is that capitalism doesn't actually exist in the form that people believe it does. And like we were talking about before, there's always regulation. And there's always government intervention. And if there isn't, the system will collapse in 10 seconds. So, and a perfect example of it is not bailing out these banks and these insurance companies that committed fraud.
Which banks?
2008?
The
investment banks.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
it's gross.
Exactly.
It's gross.
So that...
But I'll just play devil's advocate. And I'm not saying, I don't know as much. There's a lot of shit going on in these rooms. What would have been the alternative for that? And I'm not so sure that it would have been better.
In the long run, I think it would have been.
In the long run, probably yes. Yeah. But in the extreme short term, like, dude, that was the system. The system was about to break.
Yeah, we've allowed it to become like that. That's the problem. Is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But I think it's really easy to kind of like say I wouldn't have done that. But when push comes to shove, and there's a joke. I'm not
pretending I'm a politician. I would have made a different decision.
Or it's like they asked it was a joke. So someone goes up to him, like central bankers with interest rates and all this kind of stuff. They go, what would you do if you became the central banker, the leader of the Fed, and Chair Powell? Goes, on my first day, I'd resign. Because it's just like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. What the fuck do they do? So anyways, the point I'm just trying to make is for that particular scenario, the system was about to break. I don't know what I would have done, and I'm not nearly smart enough to understand what I should have done.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that's part of the problem.
What I'm saying is for an airline or a airplane manufacturer like Bombardier, there's plenty of other manufacturers out there. For a company like that to be bailed out is utterly ridiculous. Let the company go bankrupt. Another company is going to come in, buy the assets at a major discount, and they're going to start up, and it's going to be a healthy balance sheet. And over the long run, it's going to be better. It's going to benefit the consumer because it's going to be less expensive. When these bailouts are given to these companies that are not running efficiently, and giving them a bailout is just a Band-Aid. It doesn't fix anything. They're going to need another bailout down the line. And basically, where does this money come from? It's taxpayer dollars to protect the jobs, and then these guys take big bonuses. I'm on your side.
Is that capitalism doesn't actually exist in practice. So all these companies, and you can start from the bottom and name virtually all of them. They were all created by the system that has been put in place by a government. So sometimes more directly than others. So hypothetically, all these pharma companies in the States, they have what they have because of the rest of society and the government. So insulin, developed by professors at the U of T, sold to two companies for $1, and now those companies are charging astronomical amounts for something they didn't create. The COVID vaccine,
they're trying to pass,
developed by the government with government grants, bought by the government,
I know,
and profit. Why is a company And when you're talking about inefficiency, that is the most extreme case of inefficiency I've ever seen. The government pays to develop something. The government is the only customer.
Yeah.
And the only people who lose money are the taxpayers. And the only people who make money is the company that didn't do anything to develop that thing in the first place. That is not capitalism.
I agree. I agree, but it goes back to like my main point. If we were allowed, if policymakers, and this isn't going to happen, but if they would get out of the way, if somehow in this utopia world where lobbying was illegal and capitalism was allowed
That's
to
not
take
a utopia world. It should be illegal.
It's
agree. Illegal in a lot of places.
I agree, but it isn't. But so what I'm saying, capitalism, the idea of capitalism itself, this isn't what's happening right now. This is not capitalism.
Correct.
And I agree. It's capitalism for the poor. It's socialism for the rich, because whenever they make a bad decision, they're gambling with taxpayer dollars. When you get to a certain size, they know that, well, what the fuck do I care? Let's make this risky investment.
Yeah.
If I make the right decision, I make 50%. If I lose, I'll get bailed out. So
think about
why
how
wouldn't
far $700 billion could have gone.
I agree.
It's chilling to think that the only so what's funny is think about how far $700 billion could have gone.
It is 104.
104. Okay, bro,
Yeah.
we got plenty of time. No problem.
Do we?
Okay. Well, I have golf at 2:30.
Okay. Think about how far that money could have gone, and then also think about. So that money could have been given to the poor. Let's just say directly. Obviously, that's an exaggeration. And the reason that money was needed was because the poor were exploited. Do you see what I'm saying? So they're losing out to these companies indirectly through free markets. And then when it all goes to hell, they don't get the benefit. The companies do. It's that concept of trickle-down economics. Let's not give it to the people that actually need it. Let's give it to these companies so they can take their share and then hypothetically maybe benefit the population, which doesn't happen.
And this started, I was listening to this guy, I forget his name, but he was talking about this, and this relationship between corporation and government started, I want to say it was like 50 years ago, where corporations started to get really, really, really powerful because they were becoming, as opposed to fighting legislators and saying, get out of my business, just like stop telling me what to do, leave me the fuck alone. They said, you know what? Let's partner up with them. And since that, over the past 40, 50, 60 years, corporate America and corporate Canada, they have captured Washington, and they have captured Ottawa. Mm-hmm. It's completely, it's crazy. It's actually crazy.
More so in the States because they don't have the laws that protect like we do here. So they
but
have
you can make the argument it's the same thing.
I mean,
here.
it's the same thing, maybe just not as bad.
But like you don't think the CEO of a big bank can't make a call to the decision maker?
Guaranteed.
You know what I mean?
I'm just saying that big corporations in the States have infiltrated politics to a certain level, and here to a certain level.
Yes.
The States has obviously there are other problems. Their Supreme Court has been infiltrated, which luckily I don't believe ours has.
Okay.
And I mean, you just look like what's coming out in the news about Clarence Thomas and stuff like that. It's just absolutely
Who's
ridiculous.
Clarence Thomas? I don't know.
The Supreme Court justice that's been like getting paid vacations from multinational corporation CEOs and stuff, and who ends up ruling on
the
cases,
Supreme Court.
Yeah, and who ends up ruling on cases that those companies are involved with, and then doesn't.
And it's
declare.
so crazy.
And he has
it's
a wife who tried to start an insurrection.
It's out in the open too. Like they don't even try and hide it. Like
they don't.
What's the Democrat from San Francisco, the old lady there? What the fuck's her name? Democrat
Pelosi.
There's like a Twitter account. Basically, just follow her stock picks. Her stock picks, she'll buy the stock, and then a piece of legislation will pass
All the time. All government, and
but they don't even hide it.
I don't want to pick on Democrats. It's all.
I agree, but they don't even hide it.
No, it's everywhere. They all
like how
benefit. If you look at the people that especially in 2008, I remember seeing something. It was like a list of people that were invested in these companies.
Yeah.
They all got out before the market crashed. And everyone's like, all right. Like, if any individual person did that, they'd be in jail for 30 years.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So
it's insider trading.
Yes, it is. Well, literally insider.
And they don't even have to answer the question.
No.
Like, so they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Because
like,
their debates are protected in the Senate or the whatever.
And like they press her and they go, how is it that whatever salary is 180 or 200 grand a year, or whatever the fuck
and
it
you
is,
have
and you're worth $100 million, whatever the hell it is. Like how that's.
You know why? It's because they're paid by these companies to do speaking engagements at $10 million a pop.
Yeah.
And it's so out in the open.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why our government doesn't work. The concept of government is good. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that if it works as designed, it's good. Whereas if a corporation works as designed, it's not good. Do you see what I'm saying? A corporation works as designed.
I understand your point, but I just don't agree with it. Like I'm much more, again, we're like beating a dead horse, but we understand each other. You would much rather trust the institution of government, whereas I would much rather.
Because at least they pretend to have our interests at heart.
I would much rather trust the institution of a corporation because it's out in the open. It's direct. It's, hey, I just want to make money off you. I want to give you a product or service. You don't have to buy it. The corporation can't force you to do anything.
So the corruption is out in the open, so it's good.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but what I'm saying is a government can force me to do things that against my will, that I don't necessarily want to do. A corporation cannot do that directly. Maybe indirectly through legislation, but what I'm saying is this is just why.
Yes, they can.
All I'm trying to say is I disagree with you, but I'm trying to, in my opinion, the lesser of two evils is the institution of the corporation.
Yeah, well.
That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that.
That's fair.
That aspect.
I think this is a good point to leave, Mike.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm starting to lose my
my
edge.
No problem. So, my edge. Guys, this is the Freemium Podcast. We had Mike Khoury.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's conversation. We touched on some spicy topics. And if you like everything, feel free to subscribe. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.